Standing out in a crowd. That's a phrase that I heard a lot over the years. How to stand out in a crowd. How to avoid standing out in a crowd. I guess it depends on your circumstance and your perspective whether or not you want to stand out in a crowd. If you're a criminal, for example, you don't want to stand out in a crowd, you want to hide in the crowd. If you stand out, you'll get caught. But if you're an artist or an aspiring athlete, or you're entering some kind of contest, or maybe you're just a child that's trying to impress mom and dad and have them be proud of you. From that perspective, you might want to stand out in a crowd. How do you do that? On social media, on YouTube, on platforms like this, where you want your brand to grow, where you want to be more known because you get more followers, and with more followers expands your territory of influence and reach. How do you stand out in a crowd? Because there's literally millions of people that are trying to do the same thing. Interesting question. And I think it's counterintuitive to what we are taught in our culture. If you go online and you Google how to stand out in a crowd, you'll find a list of to-dos. You do this, 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 this. And what's counterintuitive about that is that that to-do list is a list that those same millions of people that are looking to stand out in a crowd are following. So the advice is, if you want to stand out in a crowd, do the exact same things that everybody else is doing. Isn't that funny to you? It seems a little off to me. Because I think the way you stand out in a crowd is by being yourself. You are uniquely made in all of creation. And the fact of the matter is, in order to be noticed, in order to be seen, in order to pop visually, socially, I think you've got to be yourself, because there's no one like you. There's only one you. A hilarious story from a young man who is near and dear to me. His name is Felipe. I met Felipe probably 4 or 5 years ago. And Felipe is Brazilian by origin of birth, but he is Japanese by ethnicity. So he was born and raised in Brazil. His first language is Portuguese. His second language is English. And when I met Felipe, one of the first questions I asked him was, okay, brother, do you consider yourself Brazilian or Japanese? And before I finished asking the question, he said, Brazilian. I'm Brazilian. I'm like, all good. He told me a story that had me in stitches, man. He and his family went on vacation to Japan. And it was, I think it might have been the first time that they went. I don't recall. But they flew to Tokyo and had a great time. But one of the occurrences that he experienced was getting on the fast train. They got off the train, and I can't recall if if it was a big mall area or what it was, but there was some kind of area that they got off the train and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in this area. It was a sea of people. So his family got off the train and he was walking and noticing his environment and all the people around him. And he turned around and he had a little bit of a panic attack because he didn't know where his family was. There was a sea of people, and for perhaps the first time in his life, that sea of people looked like he looked, like his family looked, because they were in Japan. And the majority of people there were Japanese. And he had difficulty finding his family because they were in a crowd that he was struggling with standing out in that crowd. He never had that experience before because he grew up in Brazil. And then they moved here because dad had a job through Nike, and they've always been in multicultural, multi-ethnic situations and places where they lived and school settings. And it was interesting to hear him tell that story. It was hilarious to him, but at the time, it was a little bit frightening. It's like, my goodness, we're not really standing out in this crowd. We're very similar to everybody here in this country. So I wonder if the key to standing out in a crowd is the individual that wants to stand out in the crowd, or is it picking and choosing the right crowd? You see, there's some crowds that I will immediately stand out in because of the color of my skin. I'll walk into a crowd that is predominantly majority culture, and if everybody is white or Caucasian or European and their skin color is lighter than mine, immediately when I walk in, I'm going to stand out in that crowd. But then I'll go other places and other situations and it's more difficult. Like, for instance, if I went to a musical event and I am one of 20 artists and we all have an opportunity to go on the stage and sing one song and impress the crowd. That's a little more difficult if all of the artists are talented and gifted, have passion, love what they do just as much as I love what I do. Some might even love it more than I do, which I would find hard to believe because I adore music. But do you see my point? It becomes a little more difficult to distinguish yourself from everybody else that looks, sounds, has same kinds of passions, that we're all a little bit similar and familiar. So what's the key? How do I stand out in a crowd? Well, I'm Avery. And I'm going to be the best Avery that I possibly can. That's my answer. That's my advice. If I don't be the best Avery that I can be, who will? And that's my advice to you. That's my counsel to you. That's what I'm pondering today. Don't try to stand out in a crowd by being like everybody else. That makes no sense to me. Stand out in a crowd by being yourself. Unapologetically. Be fully you. Personally, I think the world is a better world because you're in it. Have you subscribed to this channel yet? If you haven't, I'd love for you to do that. I appreciate the support, the love, the encouragement that several of you have shown. Thank you for this experience of pondering over coffee with me.